people got out of bed this morning? Please raise your hands. Raise your hand if you think it's too cold out. Raise your hand if you don't think it's too cold out. Raise your hand if you're not in the mood to raise your hand. Don't you love paradox? All in favor of better government, please raise your hand. All right. Where is he taking us? Now, those of you who are raising your hand, there are some of you who are actually doing some sort of enthusiasm poll. That is, if you sort of agree, you get the face hand. If you agree a little bit more, it's just over the head. And if you really agree, you get the full elbow extension about it, sort of like a pole that you take to people. So let's try this again. Raise it. Thank you, Walter. I knew I could count on you. All right. Raise your hand if you think it's too cold out. Thank you. All right, so now there's a whole bunch of reasons why people raise their hands. Dozens of reasons. If you know a reason why people raise their hands, please raise your hand. Right. Short answer. They think they're volunteering for something. Volunteering. Okay, we got volunteering. Why else for people? Walter.
They want to get somebody's attention.
They want to get somebody's attention like you do. Right. Okay. Raise your hand. Why they think they know the answer, so they raise their hand. Why else do people raise their hand?
You raise your hand for sure.
You raise your hand for sure?
If you're sure.
Oh, if you're sure. Right, that commercial, right. Raise it. I wasn't going to bring that one up, but thank you. Other reasons people raise their hands. Come on. What? You didn't raise your hand. Hailing a cab. Right, okay. No, you said something already. Who else? Come on.
For help.
For help. Over here. I need some help. Good. Why else do people raise their hands? Yep.
It's good for self-esteem.
It's good for their self-esteem, so they just walk around with their hand up in the air. It's a new one, but I'm willing to try. I need this. Why else do people raise their hand? To get a good stretch. That's good. That's good. Why else do people raise their hand? If you're happy and you know it. Oh, they want attention. Yes, Steve. Why else do people raise their hands? In a worship service, those of you of the charismatic persuasion will often be called to raise your hands for worship.
They want to be included.
They want to be included? Yeah, I'm a part of that. I'm here. I want to be a part of that.
To vote.
To vote. Right, to vote, to register an opinion. To get that thing off the shelf. To take an oath. I solemnly swear. That's good. I haven't thought that. These are all pretty good things. No, you have to raise your hand. Yes.
Got a question?
If you have a question, you raise your hand.
You're pointing at the stars.
Start pointing at the stars. You're reaching, pointing. Why else do you raise your hand?
I'm ready.
I'm ready. Send me in, Coach.
Because you're told to raise your hand.
Because you're told to raise your hand. And you always do what the preacher says. Anything else? That was just a little, I need a hand. I need a whole hand now. To be quiet. You raise your hand in the classroom. My brother teaches his friends, my brother who's much older than I am. 10 years older than I am. He'll never listen to this, so I can do this. My brother, who's much older than I am, tells his friends, if you've ever heard the story that I'm in the midst of telling you, please just raise your hand. And he'll look around the room and decide whether he's going to continue the story. So you raise your hand. Any other things that you raise your hand for?
Pray.
To pray? Yeah. Some, not a lot of the white repressed culture does that, but a lot of the other people do this with prayer. That's right, Walter. I knew I could count on you.
Music.
To what?
Music.
To conduct music, you raise your hand. Yeah, this is,
Surrender.
to surrender. 2 hands usually, but it could be one. All from this. Most of them sort of good things. Most of them that require some sort of input for an auction, for volunteering, for voting, for saluting, for hailing a cab, for getting attention, for surrendering, for giving a benediction, for asking a question, for indicating you know the answer, for praising God in worship. In general terms, raising your hand signals a sort of engagement. Some sort of engagement with the world. We need to get better at raising our hands. Now, we don't all have to become charismatic. We don't all have to have some sort of gesture of expression. But I would like for us to see the relationship between our hands up and our hearts out. Paul connects the raising of hands to God to our relationship to each other in 1 Timothy when he writes, I desire then that in every place the people should pray, lifting holy hands, without anger or quarreling. Right away, this had to do with this. We're celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s weekend here of service tomorrow. And he wrote, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? On occasion, it's helpful to review some of the most basic things in our lives, and today I'd like to review the need to help other people. I know this sounds sort of trite and basic, but we're going to review the need to help other people, why we volunteer, why we serve. I'm going to talk about why we raise our hands for Jesus, for joy, and for justice. I know it's difficult. It's a little embarrassing to raise your hands. You can't even, there's another one, the crying baby, That's another one. We raise our hands for Jesus because Jesus tells us to use our hands. Jesus tells us to do things for other people. Jesus tells us the story of the Good Samaritan about actually doing something, saying, yes, I'll help. I know it's just terrible and asking us to do this every week. Jesus, at the end of his ministry, says, in the resurrection experience, people say, well, when did we see you? And we see Jesus. We see Jesus when we see the stranger, the thirsty, the sick, in the prison. The healing, feeding miracles of Jesus. We raise our hands to say yes to things or to ask questions. We raise our hands in general in our spirit because Jesus organizes our understandings of what God is about. And Jesus calls us to service. Jesus says, you raise your hand. We raise our hand because Jesus is organizing our personal values and we are called to serve others. Jesus organizes how we work in the world, how we are called. And so we raise our hand. We say, yes, I'm Glenn Blinkman, and I'm going to go back there and I am going to try and fix that audio system that has static. And in fact, Glenn, you can turn it up because I'm going to get hot here. I'm going to fill this room whether the thing is on or not. We raise our hands because Jesus asks us to raise our hand, not to sit back and do nothing and be nothing. We raise our hands because Jesus asks us to raise our hands. We raise our hands for joy, too. I wonder if it's this one. We raise our hands in relationship to the world because Jesus asks us to do this. In fact, tells us to do this. But we also raise our hands because it brings us a kind of a joy. The quotes in the bulletin talk about how this quality of engagement with the world actually helps us. Yes, we're doing it for other people, but it turns out that this act of service is actually reflected, and that it helps us as much as it helps other people, sometimes more for us. There's been studies done over the last 20 years, and research indicates that those who volunteer have lower mortality rates. This means they die less often. I'm not exactly sure what a lower mortality rate is, but it's a good thing to have a lower mortality rate. Those who volunteer have lower mortality rates, they have greater functional abilities, and they have lower rates of depression later in life than those who do not volunteer. People who volunteer, who raise their hands, get reflected because people are more likely to get benefits, especially if they volunteer when they're older. Let me look around. That's you. So these benefits that come from volunteering for stuff are actually more effective statistically the older that we get and if we put in more than 2 hours a week. So this isn't 15 minutes sweeping the neighbor's walk, although that's a wonderful thing. It turns out that we need sort of a larger commitment to understand what's going on in terms of our relationship with the world. Questions, answers, engagements. I'll do it. I'm voting. We're raising our hands. And it is with a joyful response. We raise our hands, and all of a sudden our hearts are raised as well. We raise our hands because Jesus tells us to. We raise our hands because it brings us joy. And we raise our hands because it brings justice to the world. Inaction breeds injustice. Apathy allows moral anarchy. We know this even in the Old Testament, the famous line from Proverbs, idle hands are the devil's playground or workshop. So if you're just the higher you reach for God, the more God calls you to justice. Irish statesman Edmund Burke is famous for saying the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. It's for good people not to raise their hands. It's for good people not to ask the question, or not to give the answer, or not to vote, or not to say, yes, I'll do it. So when God calls us to raise our hands, we do this for justice. We do this because if we don't do it, the world becomes an amoral place in which the poor are exploited. When we vote, when we volunteer, when we say yes, when we raise our hands to be counted among the people who care, we do what is necessary to raise our hands. If we think we need better government, we say yes and run for office. If we think we need a better church, we help out. If we think we need a better world, we light one candle rather than curse the darkness. Our whole life in this walk of faith is about raising our hand to say yes to God, to say yes to Jesus, to say yes to what is joyful and yes to what is justice, all from the act of saying, I reach out and up into the world. This is more than enthusiastic beating of the drum on my part. This is what is called from us in our hearts. That we are called to lift our hands, to go a little bit out of our comfort zone. On the cold morning when we would rather stay in bed, and okay, if we come to church, maybe I'll go like this. That we are called by a God to reach out of our spirits with the help of Jesus, with the joy that it brings and with the justice that it will effect, and raise our hands higher than will be comfortable for us. We will raise our hands in the fact that people might think strangely of us. They'll think that I'm charismatic or something, or they'll think, or I don't, or I'm
don't want anybody to tell me what to do. And I'm anti-authoritarian, so I don't want to raise my hand. Because I don't want to, I have complete free will, and I want to do what I want to do. And it is a struggle. It will always be a struggle to raise the hand, and if it wasn't, what would it be worth? We are called to this small symbolic act. We are called to somehow in our spirit go beyond the easy thing. To go beyond the thing that we don't want to do. And to lift our hand until our hand lifts